A very good evening to you all. I am just doing my usual checks to make sure that everything is running smoothly here in South Devon. I'd just like to ask anybody who is listening right now whether they can just let me know that they can hear me okay. The main thing is I've got a comments box here and I can see everybody's comments that they will put into Facebook or similar. So if you can hear me and everything's okay, if you could just let me know with a comment, that would be absolutely marvelous. Because not only am I your host this evening, I'm also a kind of DJ producer, if you like, trying to do everything in my office across two monitors with all sorts of buttons and things to press here. Fantastic. Look, everyone's coming through. That's really good. Very nice to see you all this evening. It's getting darker, isn't it? A lot quicker right now. And that means that we're getting towards the autumn months without a doubt. And I've been up on Dartmoor the last couple of days, just having a look around and also doing some walking. And I also have just come back from a personal trip with a friend of mine from the Outer Hebrides. So I went to Harris and Lewis and just managed to only a short visit, sadly, just a few days. So I just want to say hello to a few people, especially this guy who I know very well. Howard is from Boston, USA, not Boston, Lincolnshire, but from Boston, USA. Hi, Howard. I'm so glad you could make it. That's really great. Now, on this comments box that I've got here, if anybody pops in a comment and wants to say hello and also wants to ask a question about anything we're going, because I can see them on the screen at the same time as doing the presentation, you're by all means welcome to do that, which is really good. Another thing I really want to point out at the moment is this, which is it's a free talk. For some reason, the Camera World team, whenever we do these, seem to get scammers who will send you direct Facebook links explaining to you that you have to pay for this talk. And I'm just letting you know now that that is not the case. You don't have to pay for this talk. It is a free talk. So if anybody starts trying to suggest that it isn't, or taking you over to some other pay site or something like that, then it is not legitimate. It's not a legitimate thing. So just remember that we're on hand to try and sort that out as well. We've got Krista, who's from Camera World, and she'll not only be putting any links that we think are necessary from any of the equipment I've been talking about, but also to to fight them off for you with a big digital media stick or something, and she'll batter them with. So yeah, it's a free talk. Please ignore anything about payment or anything like that at all. So, right, the first thing I've got to talk to you about today, we're going to do a whole series of autumn gold. Now, autumn is a tricky subject. I think it's quite a tricky subject. Trying to get the quality and the clarity of image, I think, is probably one of the hardest things. And it's very much about lighting, and it's very much about composition, without a doubt. So I've got a whole load of images to show you from different places with different thinking, but I've also realized that I have a very, very large selection of Lake District images, because I've been up there the last few years running photographic trips and generally just experiencing it. I think my first trip up there was early 2010, and I didn't really know it very well at all, and it becomes a big logistical complication for a lot of people. It becomes more about the sitting down, the planning, the working out, the trawling through images to try and find locations that are going to stop you from wasting your time. Because one really important factor is we also have a very shorter day, don't we? We're in that period at the end of October where dawn is getting nearer 8 o'clock, sunset is probably around about 5:30, and things will greatly reduce with the hours of the day. So it's going to be different from where you are. Howard, on the other hand, my friend from Boston, USA, will have been delighted with the autumn that he gets. I've actually been to the US and I did a commission for AA Travel many years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, where I was asked to go out to Boston, USA, and I got to see the whole of fall happening all the way up the east coast of the US. It was utterly fascinating and a really great experience. I worked 28 days solid. I couldn't stay there any longer because of the restrictions on my visa, and I lost about 1.5 stone in weight from running around like an absolute maniac trying to get this whole contract finished. So it was complicated indeed, but I got to see just how amazing the maple is out in the USA. But I've got all sorts of different trees to show you at the same time as well. And what I've also done is I've restricted this talk specifically to the UK. I think it's a better idea to do that anyway, because I know that most people, of course, will be doing it from the UK. And I want to give you tips and advice about what to do and how to approach subjects and exactly what to do. And I'm sure Howard, for example, would be fine to see pictures from the UK because he's bored of seeing fantastic colours in the US. I just want to say hello to a few other people who are here. There's some people here from Dublin, so that's great as well. I don't really know much about Ireland for the whole autumn colours thing. I'm sure that you do. There's another Dublin there as well. How are you doing, Ito? That's great to see. So we've got a load of people here from all over the country and over in Ireland as well, which is really great. So without further ado, let me start by showing you my other screen, and we'll start off with a bit of a banger, which is, it's basically some images that I wanted to start you off with from that depict what happens at this particular time of year, I would say. Now, what tends to happen is that we get a lot of mist at this time of year. There's two sort of mist times of year, if you like. The first, of course, is going to be around sort of like April. And I know you can get fog at mist at any time of year, but what happens is we get warmer days and cooler nights. So we'll have warmer days as we have at the moment well, like I've said, I mean, at the moment in the daytime it's anywhere near 15, but at night time it's going to get a lot cooler. So there's a high likelihood that you'll get mist, and you can take that to great advantage. So devoid of mist, devoid of tree colours, what we're going to do is just firstly look at some misty pictures, which I think would be quite nice. Now, most of these, I have to say, have been shot using long lenses, and I am a self-confessed long lens addict. I absolutely adore my 100 to 400 Canon, which is a superb optic, and I know that there are other companies that do these optics as well. The 100 to 400 1.4 is and 1.4 is a fantastic lens. It's really good and gives you a huge 560 millimeters of focal length. Now, what people don't tell you about this lens is, as well, is it's also an incredibly good macro, because it gives you a close focusing. I think it's of about 900 millimeters. Now imagine 900 millimeters at 560 millimeters of focal length. It's absolutely unbelievable. So it gives you this really fabulous opportunity to use this lens as a macro and to use this lens as a long lens landscape. Now, this is a stitch panorama, and it was divine. This was up in the Peak District, and it was around about late October when I took this. And this just gives you some kind of idea of what you can get if you get yourself to a high viewpoint. Now, if you've got high viewpoints near you, then most definitely have a really good look around to see if you can get east facing. Remember, into the sun is always exceptionally good, but an east facing dawn. So if you do get low-lying mist, and that's low-lying mist, not fog, which of course just will obscure this whole scene, you may get this wonderful effect like you're seeing here with all of these rays pulling backwards off the image. Now, processing-wise, it's fundamental to make sure that if you are processing an image like this, that you don't start trying to jack loads of contrast in by pulling your black and white points in. So in other words, you're creating a lot of dark tones. Fog and mist doesn't contain dark tones. It's all mid-range and highlights. Some darks, as you can see from some of the darker greens here. But don't make the mistake, if you're shooting from a long distance away, that you are going to squash the histogram and make a lot of darker tones. It will look incorrect because of the distance that you're viewing this. Krista's joined us. Just thought I'd let you know she's there on hand. She says bonsoir, so she's there as well. So she'll be fending off anybody. We've got loads of people. We've got somebody from France here as well. Hello, Angela. How are you doing? And from Inverness, we've got Margaret Mackenzie. How are you doing, Margaret? And various other people here from all over the place. Paul Anthony says here, had my honeymoon in fall and turned around New England. So I know what you mean, David. Fantastic. Nice to hear. It's really exceptional, isn't it? It's a wonderful place. I went all the way up to the state parks up at the top of Maine and came all the way down the coast and went in. It was an exceptional time of year. It was really good. So anyway, to our next picture. Now, this is a squarer long lens shot again. This is done in Cumbria. I like this picture in particular because it works very well as a square, and it also has this wonderful stacking of layers, plus the fact it's got a little village you can see sort of nestled in between the trees there. So all that is quite a distance, maybe quarter of a mile, something like that, but you can see how it gets compounded by that longer lens. So, right, one of the first things that tends to happen is, depending on where you are in the country, autumn will kick in earlier or later. And I've actually been up to Dartmoor this weekend, and I'd say that it's beginning. It's starting to get autumn colours. I mean, the first thing is to go the ferns. So the ferns will change the landscape into a sort of a russet red. But the next thing to do is you have to really know your trees as well, which is really vitally important. So depending on the type of tree, you'll get more intense colour, or you might get less color depending on also how the tree is reacting to the temperature. So one of the things to remember is that oak trees don't normally go a particularly good color. It's things like your deciduous trees, like your beeches, that have a lot of gold to them. Oaks tend to be a sort of a greener, sort of like browner gold when they are in full swing. And also it depends on where you are within the UK. So, for example, up in Scotland, there's a lot more larches, and the larches go this beautiful yellow, or can do, but then they also go this sort of rather weird green sometimes as well, greeny yellow. So when you don't get a very good autumn, then you might find your reds are less red, the sort of browner red. And when your yellows are not so good, they'll be yellowy green. So it may be that you just have to wait a bit longer, but sometimes it just will not get that awesome gold that you're after. This is a lovely moment, actually taken from the top of Glastonbury Tor, and this was looking due east around about this time of year again, with these beautiful rays coming off these trees. There's rather low sun. It's only risen a little bit, but there's enough to create these fabulous patterns going right across the picture. It was a really truly special moment, I have to say. And look, there's that all important focal point. Just this one tree here is just the one thing that anchors the entire picture, just because it happens to be slightly darker than the rest of the scene. And as you go through, you can start exploring more, and there's a little tower at the top here you can see in the top left, which also captivates as well. So mist and fog are in abundance usually in April and September, October time. We haven't had that much of it down here in southern England, but maybe you guys have. And when it's correct, it's really something else. But the main thing is that this is leading the way, because the temperature is changing, everything is beginning to crisp up, and depending on where you are, you need to start doing your research to find those locations, those key locations. Now, they're not necessarily far away. They can actually be really quite local to you, depending on where it is and what access that you've got. Again, some people have access to national parks. Other people have access to local parks. It can be just as impressive one way or the other. It doesn't really matter. The thing is to understand your trees and understand what you're looking at, and also keep a check on everything around you. So if you can't move around and you can't go too far away, well, let's just work with what we have. And that's one of the most important parts of any photography, is having a keen eye and having a very refined objective of what it is that you're wanting to do, watching things changing around you and just seeing how they go. Now, my local knowledge, which is Dartmoor, South Devon, all of this area, is based upon watching this over 15 years. There's 15 years worth of thinking, oh, that tree's not as gold as it was this year, or similar. You can see where I'm coming from. It's very important to learn your area and refine all of this. It really is. So this is another one just from Glastonbury Tour I thought I would throw in. I particularly like this because it looks like it's been etched in pencil or something. It works really well. That's one of the beautiful effects of fog and mist. So this is more where I live. I don't get these huge, great sweeping autumnal panoramas like you get from the Lake District. I actually get things that are much more, should we say, pastoral. This is a bridge called Holme Bridge. It's in Dartmoor. And I've got quite a lot of rivers with autumn colour where I live, which is quite nice. This is about 15, 20 minutes from my house on the edge of Ashburton, just on the way up onto Dartmoor. And it's a very good spot because you get these lovely beaches either side of the tree. And I thought I'd show you one side and the other, but it will give you an idea of the conditions. Now, the main thing is that with all of this, what you have to be aware is that you don't always get really good light. That's the other thing. You don't get fantastic light all the time. Often in autumn, this particular time of year, you get subdued light. And what can we do about that? Well, it's often can be just as effective depending on, you know, the particular composition that you've got or what it is that you have to work with. So one of the things I found that's always been really good, and I found it, you know, well, I'd say probably most times when I've been to rivers, that the trees on the edges of the rivers seem to get quite colourful because of temperature differences, I think, again. This is up on Dartmoor. It's it's on the outskirts of a place called Fingal Bridge. And Fingal Bridge has got the, I think is it the Dart or the Tean, I can't remember which one it is, running through the landscape there. So wellies on, slowly climbing into the river rather carefully, and trying to get an interesting sort of foreground effect from the rushing that's coming past. So I've been up here quite a few times trying to get all sorts of different perspectives up here, and with some effect, and other years with not such effect. So just bear in mind that if this is your first year of going out and actually photographing autumn, then don't worry. The main thing is that as is said a lot of the time, that you know, that it's not wasted in that sense. That the you know, it's research that isn't wasted. So if you go out and you think, well, it wasn't that great, don't worry, because that will be positive research, because you may go back next year and find that it's actually exceptional. So here I've taken the same tree, but I'm actually further back, so I've got less of a foreground effect. But again, it can be quite effective, just as effective in the same way. Now, there's a mix here of, I think it's of oaks and of beech and all sorts going on in this forest. You're getting all these different colours of golds and yellows. And Paul says, "Good pub at Fingal Bridge." I think you're dead right. It's very nice, actually. There's good coffees there as well. So this is, like I said, just a section of river. It's a small section of river. And I wanted to sort of give you an idea of what you can do if you've got sections of river near where you are as well. So this is earlier autumn. You can see some of the leaves here haven't even gone yellow, but what we've got is a nice array of tones. So if you do get greens and you do get oranges, and some trees are a bit more advanced and a bit ahead of each other, then don't worry about that. And again, perhaps what you can do is look in the same way that I've done here. So go looking for different elements, and even down to just this tuft of grass here in the bottom right corner. It gives you this feeling you could just rub your hand on the side of the trunk here, looking right across to the focal point, which of course is the burning orangey gold that we've got here. So an array of different results that you can get by a river. So go and have a look at some rivers. Of course, water also means reflections, and reflections can be some of the most beautiful, can yield some of the most beautiful pictures in autumn. And I'll be showcasing some of those later on as we go through the talk. So the main thing is just to start to learn where you live and start to look around at where you live. Now, I'm going to take you up to the Peak District next. This is, I have to say, is probably one of my all-time personal favourite autumn pictures that I've ever taken. And this was taken from a bus stop. Can you believe it? From a bus stop. There was no hiking or anything like that whatsoever. It was taken from a bus stop just outside, I think it's Hathersage, and it was, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And when I look at this photograph in detail, in fact, let's get rid of me a minute, and we'll just have a full screen of that. When I look at this in detail, what I particularly love about it is the fact that, again, we've got this sense of distance, and we've got darker tones here. We seem to have this sort of lighter tones here, and it seems to be that this is in more direct light, and this is in sort of side light coming through cloud or something like that area there. But this is distinctive difference between the two. I think the main thing is, as well, is we've got this nice sort of goalposts. We've got this one tree here, and then this all important one here to the right, which I think works really well. I remember doing this at the time thinking, I just can't bear to crop anything off, because when I start looking in here, it's just as interesting as anything else. But it's got this lovely russet reds from the dying ferns, and just seems to contain everything. It looks very painterly. And when people say that, I think what they're referring to is brush strokes. It seems to look like a watercolor or an oil painting or something like that. And I think that this image has that, very much so. Chris has just popped in and said, my bus stop doesn't have views like that. No, I think there's not many bus stops that do. So this was dropping down a hill, I remember, and I had to sort of, I was in my old camper van at the time, and I had to sort of abandon it by the side of the road and go running down the hill. But what I wanted to show you was that this is very important, because this is just a 11 o'clock in the morning picture. This isn't great light. This is far from great light. It's the blue sky day, and the sun's coming through the clouds, and we've got what I classify as probably one of the most important elements of my photography, but I think I'd like to say is of yours as well, which is always rely on side light. If you can get side light, then do it, because can you see how wonderfully rounded that this tree here looks? And same with this one. Well, these areas, all the trees have got this sort of curving effect to them that you can't actually get when you've just got light straight on the subject or light from behind. Backlighting can be utterly beautiful at the same time, but I think that when you look at this for its elements, it's the side lighting that really makes it much more characterful. So I remember this was a reasonably early photograph, in the sense probably about 2008-9, I think, one of my first trips up to the Peak District from quite a long time ago. And I wanted to show you this because I just thought to myself at the time how wonderful the colours were and the painterly effect. So let's just bring me back a moment. There we go. There's a landscape version of the same thing. So that's a single frame. You can see that the sky's even got bluer. It's changed. There's less wispiness. And I think it works just as well as that as well. This is the sort of thing I'd like to print. And I think it's got a lot to discover as you look through the picture. So this, I think, was Lady Bower res. I think it possibly was. I'm not entirely too sure. But again, okay, it's done in the middle of the day. It was just done on a walk. It wasn't done on any particular dawn or dusk or photographic point. I think I was just exploring and running around. But the variety of colour that you get up in the peaks is to rival the Lake District. It really, really is to rival the Lake District. And I think that in its patches, it is as impressive as a great Lake District autumn as well. So it's certainly worth looking at. I always look at the the trees in here. Can you see the trees at the back on the hillside? It looks like somebody's tried to write their name in trees or something on the back. It looks like Z-A-R-R. It could be O, Z-O-R-R. There's an O around here, so it's Zorro. I don't know. But you can see there, if you look at that, it's weirdly planted, isn't it? Why these ones are all yellow and the ones around it are green. So somebody's just popped in. Stuart's just brought a question up at the bottom. Says, is there much after processing, or just leave as natural as possible? Well, in a situation like this, Stuart, I would say that there's probably not too much done to this. Maybe a slight amplification of colour. but really not too much. It's a lot to do with color temperature as well, and I can see that from looking at this, as I probably warmed this up a bit, because the sky looks a bit too grey looking at this in retrospect. But the main thing I would say is a lot of the time you just have to be really careful about how you approach this and how you do approach the subject. I thought I'd just throw this one in because this was one of the last times I was actually in the peaks, and this was great because I was actually doing a Canon event. We were doing a sort of discovery day for a load of different Canon cameras, and one of the guys who came in was he actually had a goshawk, and he ran a sort of like adventure, a raptor adventure experience, and he had a goshawk in his car. So we took him out to the woods at Padley Gorge and said, would you move by putting your goshawk on that rock over there? You can see I've kept all the jesses that are around the legs in there, but it was wonderful just to have an opportunity to shoot a bird of prey sitting on a rock. It was fabulous, and I just thought I'd throw that in anyway. One of my only attempts or successful attempts at doing wildlife, even though it's not exactly very wild, but great fun nonetheless. So let's go back to the parks idea, the parks concept. So if you have a local park near you, there's a high likelihood that you may have some different types of trees, and depending on which types of trees you have, you could spot ones that are particularly colourful, like this Acer tree that you can see here. Now this is actually, it's up in Gloucestershire, and you can see from this that it's got a, I mean, firstly, it's a large size. Acer trees are usually quite wispy and quite thin, don't really have very much body like this. But this tree is absolutely gigantic and a really good example of an Acer. It's also got that wonderful feeling of intermittent lighting that you can see here. But it's pretty important with these. And going back to Stuart's question about the processing. The processing is pretty critical, because if you go too much, if you go too far, then what will happen is that you'll saturate all of those reds and they'll look too much and they'll clip out. That's the other thing as well. When you look at your histogram not only is displaying luminosity information, but it's also displaying your it displays saturation, if you like. So in other words, if there's no detail in red, then what tends to happen is you'll end up with the red channel will just clip out completely. And so dropping the saturation back a bit will actually separate out your reds and oranges and yellows and things on those lines. But it's a great example here of being careful with your processing and not going and pushing it too far, which is quite easy to do if you're on a saturation fueled session on the computer, which is quite easy with autumn, believe me. It's actually as much to do with lighting as you can possibly get. Now, don't forget to have a go at some details. I pretty much think that this leaf looks like it's sitting on mint choc chip, doesn't it? From the wonderful greens and the browns that you can see there, it's very chocolate-like. But the fun thing that you can do, of course, when you've got a lovely array of different trees, is keep on the lookout for leaves and to do sort of installation art, placing the leaf on a specific area, stick it on a log or something on those lines, or make an array of different leaves. Or what you could even do, which a lot of people do now, is they'll collect leaves, dry them out, and then stick them on a scanner, not even using a camera. That's great fun to do, and you can get these wonderful arrangements if you're skilled at pulling out and picking out those leaves as well. Now, remember, with a log, it's going to bend like that. And I remember this one was in specific. So when you're actually coming down on top with the camera, and you don't have to have a macro, by the way, you can actually do this with a telephoto just to line things up. But once you actually get the picture aligned, remember, you're probably going to need quite a bit of depth of field because of the curving. Let's say, for example, if you're going to place it on a log like I've done here, and that curving may mean that you lose focusing around the edges. You can see at the bottom left corner, you might be able to see here, it's just slightly out, and it is in the top right there, sharper in areas than other areas. But of course, and let me just highlight something, which is we now have fabulous focus stacking depending on which cameras that you use, and there's a lot of focus stacking that's available in lower, more consumer cameras. It's not just something that is for professional level stuff, but the R5, the R6, for example, all have focus stacking features, as do the other end of the spectrum, which I was using in the summer holidays, which was a Canon EOS M6 Mark II, which I took away with me on my travels around the UK. So the main thing is that the focus stacking feature can be used to great effect, and that can really give you the potential so that if you can't get everything in focus, then you can focus stack a range of pictures and put them together on the computer when you get back. So without going into heading off into a focusing tutorial, I'll leave it there. But it does have fabulous focus stacking potential. Oh, look who's very pleased to have an R5. Oh, no, you don't have one. You said you'd like to have one. Sorry about that. I used to have an R5. Yes, indeed. I used to have an R5. It's amazing. I've only ever handled one once. I'm actually getting an R6 in the next week or so to gain some stock images with the camera, because I want to use it from a different set of perspectives. One of the things I want to do is I want to use it for astro. I want to use it for landscapes and autumn, perhaps, things on those lines. But I also want to use it for pushing the boundaries of the ISO potential of what we can do with mirrorless cameras as well. So it's something I'm going to hopefully report back on at some stage when I get a bit further down the line. For me as a professional, of course, it's a bit complex because I'm running a business and I have to justify things. I think I've only upgraded my cameras about 4 times in the last 15 years. But when I've done so because I absolutely need the features that these cameras have. And it almost feels as like that time is now because of the quality of the images that you can get from an R5 and an R6. The potential there is utterly amazing. And I actually was sent some R6 pictures from somebody this afternoon, had a good look through them, and the ISO performance on the camera is remarkably good. I mean, I was looking at pictures that were 3,200 and higher, and you only have to touch the luminosity noise reduction by around about 20% before literally everything is gone. And I've even seen images that were way higher, sort of around about 12,000. And you only, if they're in good enough light, in the sense of if it's bright light, you only have to push the luminosity noise reduction up a fraction, and you'll really greatly reduce that. So the potential of these cameras is really something. So looking at this again, telephoto lens shots, your best friend when it comes to these sorts of leaf compositions, things like that, is going to be a 70 to 200, a 100 to 400. You can use a macro, like a 180mm macro. 90mm is not going to be as easy, but I would say the longer that you can go, the better. Very good for isolating leaves, isolating parts of the composition, and getting a really good arrangement. But it's about the composition. It's about finding the right leaves, the right branches. Everything you can see there sort of comes in from the top right, comes down through the picture, and then sort of fans out as it gets to the bottom. Now, if I go too wide, I'm going to start pulling in other areas. I need to get a very shallow depth of field. And I spent a lot of time on these Acers by shooting them all backlit. And that's what creates this wonderful interplay that you can see here with shadow and with light. So although that's quite bright sunlight, don't worry. If you don't get a day where it's really bright, it doesn't matter. If you get some light, then that will make all the difference. And you'll be able to get a disparity between certain leaves that are in front of other leaves, and it will give this sense of density that you can see here. So again, be careful about how much you push any processing, because you'll find that your colors will get a bit too intense and a bit too strong. So here's another Acer, and I wanted to sort of show you that this is something where, again, if you go a lot further back, you can start to use the sort of rule of thirds to assemble a picture of a tree. So that sort of Y split that we've got going on there with the bark going up through, and this is photographed in mute kind of overcast skies to give you some kind of concept to this. You can also see that the leaves on the floor are not the same color as the leaves that are actually on the tree. And this ace is in particularly great condition at this particular moment. So just wander, if you're in a park and you've only got access to your local park and you're keeping an eye on it and watching what's happening, just remember that it's often a lot better to go a lot further back and shoot these trees with a longer lens and make a detail of only the base of the tree. So don't worry about having to sort of get the whole thing in, which is, again, another slight mistake that does tend to happen. And just use the up sort of the fanning branches as they go up to begin with a composition like this. Just get a sort of rule of thirds or rule of quarters, as this sort of tends to be. The sort of half the picture is the tree from the top, but there's only a small amount of ground here. So just have a go at sort of doing something similar and something basic, so that you can get the balance of composition correct before you start going in too wide. Because a lot of people make a lot of mistakes of going in far too wide. They'll start with a very wide angle lens, and then suddenly they've got all of this other stuff in the background that won't actually do anything to help the photograph at all. Now, away from the parks, in the sense of the country parks, this is the New Forest. And I don't know if you live in the south of England or you've been to the New Forest, but this is a really wonderful place to go. This is Boulderwood Arboretum. And Boulderwood Arboretum is Rhinefield Arboretum, which is one side of the main road. In other words, Boulderwood is on the top half, and I think it's Rhinefield is on the bottom. Now, Rhinefield's got lots of really interesting trees like sequoias, believe it or not, and other really unusual stuff like redwoods and various other bits. But on the north side of it, you've got Boulderwood. And Boulderwood's got a lovely arrangement of old oaks and old beeches and all sorts of things. And it's quite accessible. The Arboretum Drive sort of snakes through, and you've got a lot of exciting stuff either side of the road. Again, go there the right time of day and you get all sorts. And I would recommend that if you want a really easy, quick solution to autumn, and you're in the south of England, then something like this would be a really great place to go, because what it will do is it will give you easy access. It will be very close to the car. You can wander around lots of different deciduous trees, and you can also react to the light quite quickly. And I know that these ones here are all done in evening light. So this is probably about sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, heading into the golden colors of evening. Now, this is also an example of what I wanted to show you was placement of tree trunks. You have to play this game when you're here of parallax, where all these trees have to be arranged into a balancing act, I would say. And you can see from this that this has got 5 very distinctive trees, which, although 2 of them are more prominent than others, the 5 trees going across give this a balance. You also find you'll get large sort of rogue branches like this one here, you can see. Well, there'll be other logs and various things around on the ground, and you may need to start getting in there and doing a bit of gardening. And one of the bits of gardening that I found is dragging logs about, pulling branches out the way. I do it in the spring in bluebell woodlands and bluebell forests. And what that does is it just gets that tidiness. Now, you might think, okay, well, that's what I can use Photoshop for. But at the same time, there's nothing worse than having a very large branch or a log or something like that that's at a delicate point within the picture that's going to make it more complicated to process. So if you can get in there and you can pull something out, then do so. And you'll find it will make all the difference overall. Obviously, depending on the circumstance, and whether it's just a fallen branch or whether it's actually got fungus on or something, let's just leave all that alone. But if it's something straightforward, then that's fine. But what I wanted to show you, I think, if I remember right, this is a set of trees in springtime, just to give you an idea of why autumn woodlands, and if you find high quality autumn woodlands, they can also work in springtime. So just bear that in mind. All your research that you're doing at this specific time of year, going in and looking for autumn, is just as valuable in spring. So it's going to be really good. And there we go. You can see there's the autumn version of the other one. Let's just go back a minute and let's just show you something that I noticed from taking this image, and that was I didn't like this tree. Can you see this tree in the background here on the left-hand side? And this tree here really annoyed me. And I remember when I did it thinking, oh, why did I just not move slightly? Well, it'll be this way for you, that way, just so I could just get that tree to hide behind the other. So when I went back in autumn, I found the same spot, the same clearing, and I hid one behind the other. So you've got to pay attention to this sort of stuff. So look through your images, make sure that you are your trees are well balanced, that you're leaving space at either sides of the image as well. You can see that this is getting a little bit too close, perhaps, this one here on the right to the very edge of the page there. But overall, what we've got there is a nice arrangement. It seems as though the distance between all the key trees is roughly the same, and that's what I was really trying to do. So it's a game of composition, and that composition rightfully is all about your focal length and your camera position, not so much about your camera height in these circumstances, but camera position and focal length. So what you can do, of course, is walk forwards towards the trees, and then you want to zoom out, and you will then change the spatial relationship between them. Then what you want to do is you want to go back and then zoom in, and as you do, you'll now get a different relationship and a different arrangement of trees. So it's all about finding a balance point. Then you've got to look around the edges of the frame. What's going on? If I got a branch coming in through the edge, sort of like this, well, you don't want a branch like that, because then it's going to make you feel as though there's something that you're missing outside the frame. So try and contain everything so that they aren't just trees headed off in different tree branches headed off in different directions. And then you put your cap on and you start wandering around and saying, right, I want to get rid of this. I want to remove that branch. I'll get that twig out of the way, and just go around for about 5 minutes, just having a bit of a general tidy up. You can see I've left a log here in the far right that I now regret. I should get that one out of there. Should have got that one out of there. David, you've just posted a question here. Are you using a tripod? Yes, pretty much I'm using a tripod. One of the reasons why I'm using one is not just because of the fact being that I'm probably going to use lower ISOs. And often when you're under the canopy of trees, you'll find that everything can be a little bit darker. But the other reason being as well, because sometimes, depending on what happens, for example, a burst of light through clouds, and you'll suddenly get all this wonderful bright sunshine, you may find that the images contain zones which are slightly burnt out. So sometimes you might have to do an exposure bracket, let's say a -1 and a 0, or a -2, 0, something like that. And I think that that's a very useful thing, because if you end up with it being too hot on the ground, things get burnt out, or patches of very bright light within trees, you may need to just do another exposure to darken things down again, and then use software to sort the problem. So yes, I do use a tripod for this on a lot of times, but I would also say that there's plenty of times when I've been doing this when I haven't used a tripod as well. Just basically wander around, and I find it much more flowing to work without a tripod sometimes as well. But I would use any lenses that have image stabilization, and of course, a lot of lenses do now, but also a lot of cameras have image stabilized sensors, which is another thing from the R5, R6 that's looking really exciting as well. So that's the kind of like parts of the southern forests that I sort of wanted to show you. And now what I wanted to do was show you some of the images that I've got from the Lake District, and give you some kind of idea of what we're getting here. Now, of course, when you climb in altitude, this is going to cause a great reduction in colors at higher elevations. And you can see here, I think we're looking towards Great Gable, which is this set of mountains that we've got up here in the top right. But we've got this fabulous reds and browns and yellowy browns and everything else. And even you can see here, when there's no light, when we've got a sunset happening over the back, that the separation of colors and the difference in blues and reds and everything can really make this something fantastic, and can really make this work. And you've just written here, which is a really good question, and James has just written to use a polarizer, and the answer is yes, I do. And I use a polarizer for a whole number of reasons. And the main thing I would say is when working with water, for tuning reflections. For example, if you work completely without the polarizer, you can get really good reflections, but as you turn it, what you can do is you can cut reflections from certain parts of the picture, depending on where, for example, you're trying to add emphasis. So although a polarizer you would think pretty much straight away would be useful for a cutting reflection, you can actually use it also to cut reflection off leaves, off the ground, things on those lines. So it's very exciting to use a polarizer and to spin it around, looking at the results as you go. Sometimes you use them, does absolutely nothing. But what you will find, say for example, if you have branches and leaves and they're wet, if you turn the polarizer, all of a sudden you seem to get this increase in saturation because the reflected light is interfering with the colors. So yes, a polarizer, very, very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Anne, so thank you for that. So the lakes is a difficult beast. It really is. And I'll explain to you why it's a difficult beast. Essentially speaking, year after year, and I mean, there's been some years when I've gone up to the lakes and I've literally sat there with my head in my hands for 7 days while it's done nothing but pour with rain. One particular year in specific, my good friend Justin and I went up to the lakes. We hired a cottage in Grasmere, and the day I arrived, it was lovely and sunny as I drove in, got to the lakes, and it was just drizzling a little bit. This was on the Saturday, and I left on Friday morning because I couldn't bear it anymore, which had just been 6 torrential days of rain. And I mean, it just was just the worst. And all the colors were muddy brown. It wasn't yellowy brown and lovely sort of saturation. It was far from it. And this is an example of a not very good not very good autumn, I would say. This is taken from the top of Lattrig, and Lattrig is a lovely vista that looks down over the whole of Keswick. And this is an example of an average to not very good autumn. In other words, it's just brown rather than browny yellow. And I wanted to show you that to give you an example of exactly what that is. So I basically think that you just unfortunately have to take the chance and just hope that if you go, that it's going to all come together and you're going to do everything in your power. Now, with the Lake District, a lot of it is very exposed. And what tends to happen as well is that around about mid-October, just when everything is nicely starting to crisp up, you'll get a gigantic, horrible hurricane-force storm that will knock into the whole of the Lake District and scatter 2/3 of the leaves off the trees, and will have you in great sadness, thinking when you first arrived that it's all over, you're too late, even when you weren't. You're almost too early, but it's too late. And it's a very depressing situation when this can happen, but don't lose faith. And the reason why is because you're there, you have no choice. Let's say you've got your cottage booked for the week and you're going to make the very best of it that you can. So you've got to try and start thinking in different directions. And you also have to start looking at geography. Now, in the corner over here, in the far left corner, if I just, hang on a minute, I'll just bring this up as full screen again. Up here is Borrowdale. And Borrowdale is a very, very good place to go and head. And the reason why is because it's in a big valley. It also gets very golden and can give a lot of different opportunities and is great for wandering around and walking about. There's a little mound you can see there, which is also one of my personal favourites, which is called Castle Crag. And it's got a sort of a slate quarry at the top of it. Absolutely fantastic fun to walk around. So Borrowdale, Castle Crag, Great Gables, which is up over the back of there, are great areas to go. But if you don't get the autumn you're after, you're going to have to go and find isolated pockets of trees that will work just as well. And one of the things you can do, see, by going up to a high viewpoint like this and having a good look around is going, oh yeah, have a look over there in the distance. We can see there that there's, you know, a particularly lovely batch of trees up there that I think would work really well. So it's quite good to get up high sometimes and just look around and then say, oh, right, maybe I'll go to that lake or similar. So I think that it's very important to do a recce and do a full recce. And even if it's raining, just do a recce, wander around, use the time constructively, because that's how you pick up ideas as to where and when you should go there as well. Because sometimes you'll find you're in a valley, there'll be no light. Other times you'll find that it's going to be a dawn or it's going to be a dusk, and you can work all of this out. So again, long lens shot, and I mean this is one of my all-time favorite autumn shots that I've personally taken. I was really blown away by this when I came away with it, and I think it's a combination of light and a combination of colors. And I've been back to this set of trees, I think about 3 or 4 times, and I've never seen these larches that lovely yellow ever again. Not like that. They've been greeny yellow, they've been browny yellow, the tops have been yellow, bottom half not so much. But that year, which was probably about 7 years ago, was just the best. It was fabulous. All these, like the reds in the golden light in the morning of the dying ferns that you can see all over the landscape there were just wonderful. It was these deep sort of like rich reds, and all offset by that really important triangle of green that you can see at the bottom there. It's a long lens shot that I took from a place called Side Pikes, which is in the Great Langdales, and it's a bit of a stiff hike to get up there, but produced some of the most fabulous photography I think I've ever managed to get. It was really something. So I would really thoroughly recommend looking at isolated pockets of trees as much as anything else. Howard says, is it on the way to Ullswater? No, it was actually it was near Blee Tarn, Howard, if you remember that. It was a really fabulous sort of like vista location on the top end of Blee Tarn, looking down the valley to the massive Great Langdale sort of range. Now remember, those mountains are high, so because they're high, there's a high likelihood that they're also going to get snow. They will be. I saw snow the other day in the Isle of Harris on the morning that I left and drove to Stornoway. So the whole of the tops of the mountains were all covered in snow. Obviously not for long, but it just shows you that there's a potential of getting autumn colours with snow. I mean, that's even more crazy, isn't it? So keep your eyes peeled for that. This sort of painterly landscape that you can see here is just another example of what happens when you don't get all the colours the same at the right time, and they're greens and reds and they're soft yellows and all sorts of varieties of colours. And this is up the top of Castle Crag. So I thoroughly recommend going up there. Just go for a wander around and go and it is a stiff climb to get up there. Believe me, probably about the last 15 minutes, it's like this, and there's pathways going up. But really, it's very, very good for your fitness. In fact, the Lake District is very good for your fitness overall, isn't it? But it is very good for your fitness getting up to the top of Castle Crag. So I thoroughly recommend that you go up there. It's really good. Can you believe it? I went back a year later, and when I got up there, that crow was sitting in the same tree. Unbelievable. It's a crow of habit, I'll tell you. Again, from Castle Crag, looking down the other side. But it gives you an idea again of the fact that not all trees are going to be exactly the right colours at exactly the right time in exactly the same way. You're going to get different colours, yellows, greens, reds, everything. And that's what you're after with the Lake District, is this total variety. Trying to make sure that you can get a nice framing of trees, spending the time with the composition, etc. It's really, really important that you do exactly that. You think these things out, so that you'll end up with a picture that works, that fits the frame, or in this case with the stitch pano can work just as well. So I love this shot in particular because what this one does is it shows you a transition almost, and the transition is to do with the depth of the forest as much as anything else. But if you look to the right, you can see here that the trees are very green, and then as they go across the frame, it seems to get more and more and more golden. And that's also because of the lighting as much as it is because of the position of the autumn color across the forest. The further back in it is, I think, the less yellow it is, and the more towards the edges of the forest, the yellower it is. So it's really something to look out for, to be able to show certain trees that are green, some that are yellow, some that are gold, and also to try and play around with getting all of that in good lighting. And again, what have we got? I keep going on about it, side light. That's the not so good version. Can you see what I mean? It's like it's more subdued. It's not as yellow as the other one was. It's not too bad, but it's more yellowy green. But I've seen a lot worse, believe it or not. It's been quite sort of, green with little yellow tops, brown tops. So not such a good version of the same thing. So I wanted to talk to you as well about color temperature. I think that's quite important when processing these pictures as much as anything else. I took this with a loaned 1DX Mark II, and I must admit I miss my 1D series cameras. I had a 1DX. I personally owned a 1DX, but it spent loads of its life lounging around in my camera bag, smoking cigars while all the other cameras were out doing earning a living, should we say. But the 1DX came into its own when I was photographing in places like Norway, Iceland, in other words, where it's really, really cold and you need a camera that can work in -25. And the coldest I ever shot that camera was in -41. And I can't describe to you what that's actually like, other than give you an example. I ended up with blue fingers, or the tips of my fingers were going into frostbite in no more than 15 minutes. And that was without gloves. I was a stupid idiot why I thought that I could just handle not having my gloves on, but I was using my camera with one hand in my pocket and operating it with the other. And within 10 minutes, I put my gloves straight back on again. And then within 15, I was in the van with my hands on the blowers, where I had to sit for 45 minutes whilst I kept looking at my fingers like this, going, one of them's blue and one of them's pink and the others are normal. What is going on? I think I narrowly escaped something really horrible happening to me. Liz, you've just written a good question here, which is, what lens did you use here? I guess you're asking me which lens I use for this one. This is, again, my favored focal length, which is around about 24-70. I spend a lot of my time using that focal length for these tree images. And you'll also notice that I don't get too close and wide. I tend to stand a lot further back and then compose my shots with my uprights, give myself a certain amount of ground. Going too wide, it can work, but I personally find that I'm thinking in a kind of Constable the Painter kind of way. In other words, I don't need a foreground. I'm much happier with everything being more pictorial and based on the trees. And I love this tree, the lead tree here, the way that you can see it, sort of like it's like a spiral. I mean, it's amazing how it's sort of twisting. It's sort of, someone's grabbed it and twisted it like that. It's really probably swing back at some point. But the main thing is you can see that we've got these fabulous golds. Now, here's a good tip which can really help when it comes to this sort of photography. If you end up with a mix of golds and yellows and different colors, what you can do is you can go in and you can use the color temperature slider and push it up a bit. So in other words, if you've got a 5,200, should we say, daytime white balance setting, then start to push it a little bit. 6,000, have a look at it all. 7,000, see if it golds everything up. It can really help advance autumn in that sense and give you a bit of an edge when it comes to it. You may find that it's actually better if you process the trees, in other words, the tree leaves at one temperature, and then you process the rest of the image as another. Now, it may not be easy to do from a composition perspective, but if it is, if you can do it that way, you can actually give yourself some very nice tones and very nice hues to the autumn by just pushing the temperature up for the key elements that need it. So in other words, bring the raw file into Photoshop and convert it at 2 color temperatures, and then put one on top of the other, and then blend in the areas that you think will look nicer as gold or warmer than the others. But just pushing the color temperature up doesn't necessarily yield the right result overall. Here's an example of different color temperatures again. And you can see that's the same tree and the same areas, but you can see how much bluer the greens are in the background with comparison to the oranges on the ground. And if I go back again, you can keep up with me here. You can see, look at the leaves, and you'll see that they're almost too brown, as I've tried to gain an advantage with the color temperature. And if you look at that, that's much more believable in that sense. So it's something that I think that you can play around with and really have a go at, seeing if you can get the right result from this and get it to work for you, depending on the circumstance of where you are. Here's a good question for you. Split toning ever appropriate? Yes, it is. It is appropriate, and I would say that is a very valid point. Split toning is something you can do in Photoshop, but it's also very easy to do in Lightroom. So, for example, in this example, what you could do is say, right, if you're not too sure what split toning is, the fact is that what it can do is it says, right, okay, anything that's of a lighter tone, like, say, for example, the highlights or upper mid-tones, I can attribute or add color in. So you could add in yellows to the highlights. You could then say, because Lightroom has two specific sliders, I want to add cooler tones, bluer tones, or to cool them down into the shadow areas. So you've got a combination of things that you can do there to change the hues and change the saturation as well, I should say, of the colors depending on their tonal value. And then you can get into all sorts of fun stuff with Photoshop and luminosity masking, for example. So all sorts of different ways of you being able to process pictures there. But yes, a very good, valid point. Stuart's got a question. Stuart says, would you plant the side light beforehand with an app like photopills for the direction of sun, or just walk around until you get a good shot? Combination again. It is a combination. This particular section of woodland was found by sheer accident, and when I came across it, I realized that in the late afternoon we were likely to get autumn colors from the side. So in this circumstance, it was coming across it, realizing that it had good color, and then coming back knowing that that was the case. But then there's other situations where yes, an app like photopills or similar for directions is going to work extremely well. So yes, I do a combination of both really, but I'm often looking at positions on maps and trying to work out where things are effective. So yeah, it's good to plan, and also good to just get in there and just hope that you get it right as well. So a combo of all of it. So let me tell you a funny story about this. This is a funny story. So it's a story of relentlessness. So I'd been up in the lakes. I'd had an average time. It'd been okay, but the weather hadn't been particularly great. And I was staying in a location just outside Keswick. I'd had a couple of extra days tagged onto my trip up there, and I just extended it, moved accommodation. Wake up in the morning at around about 5:45, pouring with rain. Can't be bothered, feel like, what's the point? Thought, I haven't come all this way not to do it, so stop moaning and get in the car. So I put all my stuff in the car, and I started my journey down towards Grasmere, because Grasmere's got some lovely reflection possibilities. Windy, it's never going to happen. Ended up thinking, well, I'll go over the top and just plonk myself around the back and see if I can get anything that works at all. And I went to Loughrig Tarn, and that's what you're seeing in front of you here is Loughrig Tarn. Now, the road from Grasmere goes over this hill, if you can see my cursor, down the side, comes all the way back around here. Then you drive down here, and you park your car in among these trees around here. And I remember thinking to myself, this is just pointless. It was raining and not much happening, and you can see from the look of all this up here that it's not looking particularly great. So I walked around the pathway, walked down to the side of Loughrig Tarn. You could literally surf across it. It was unbelievable. And then came around the corner and thought, well, I'm going to climb up the hill. So I just took this rather fast hack up through the field, up a track. It was pretty steep a lot of the way, and then managed to get myself to a point where I could just see over the tops of the sides of the hills behind this picture, if you like, And there it was. The sun just started to come up. There was a big gap. And I had around about 35 to 40 seconds to get the full intensity of this. And it blasted light all the way up the valley from Loughrig Tarn. And there you can see, if you look in the top, there's the Great Langdales. And I didn't even really understand how I was going to compose this. I wasn't too sure if I liked the shape of the lake. I kept thinking I wanted to go higher all the time. I couldn't see all of the lake. Didn't have any time to think. So literally, tripod up. I set up the leveling base that I've got for my tripod to make a panorama. I put this 1DX2, this lone 1DX2 on. I started left, click, 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 click. Just did a panorama until it got to the very end. And then I did another one. I just kept doing panoramas because I was concerned that I'd have no time to assimilate and to study and to look at the composition and think, oh, there's a nice little bit, I'll just zoom in. It was literally, I have 35 seconds to get this right. Panned the camera across, did 2 panoramas. I think the next one, if I just go to the next picture, there we go. That gives you an idea. Lashing with rain. It didn't only start raining, it started sleeting. Then it started sleeting and I got completely drenched. I was wearing a down jacket with no waterproofing at all. I was soaked to the skin really quickly. I realized there was nothing I could do about this. And remember, if you look at this is the left-hand side of the image. So if I go back to the other one again, you can see it here. This is what it was like probably about 5 minutes before. And then this is what it turned into 5 minutes later. I got so wet. It was just awful. So I eventually came down. And as I climbed down, I got back down to the pathway and I made myself round past Loughrig Tarn. And I looked back up, and as I looked up, I could just see this gigantic rainbow that had appeared. The sun had come out again, and now we had all of this with a rainbow. And I was like, oh, I don't believe it. I should have stayed up there. But you know how when it gets so cold and it's so wet and it's windy and it just looks like there's no chance of anything happening, and you make a decision, well, you've got to stick to it. So I felt really bad anyway that I'd actually come down from it. But this is the story. So I had no choice but to go back to the accommodation, to get my stuff, throw it in the back of the car and head my way back home. And I made my way back down the motorway, feeling quite sorry I was leaving, but really joyous that I'd managed to get this one last performance, which is what I felt like this opportunity that I managed to grasp was. And then when I got back home, one of my good friends, Tom White, he said to me, he goes, have you seen this? He said, and he just posted this link. And I clicked on this link. The following morning, somebody had got up and driven their car to Loughrig Tarn. They got to Loughrig and they'd gone round to the edge of the water and they plonked themselves right by the water's edge, and it was perfectly flat, calm. And not only had it snowed overnight, and I mean properly snowed over the whole landscape, and all the trees were there, beautifully golden, but the whole of Loughrig Tarn was a mirror. It was reflected upside down with snow, golden trees, and there was a massive rainbow going over the top of it. And I was literally, I was biting the steering wheel of the car. I couldn't believe it. It just made me so annoyed. It was the perfect autumnal picture. It was on Twitter or something, and I was literally there holding my hair. I'd been there one day earlier, and as Krista's just said, yeah, I think it was. I was more than gutted. I was so gutted. It would have just been remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. It was the most staggering picture I think I've ever seen from that area in the Lake District. So it just shows you that, you know. But hang on, let's look at this from another perspective, which is the fact that, you know, you get called onwards, don't you? This is the other really important thing. You get called onwards. You get called back. Those sorts of failures, those things that you see that then become an inspiration for you, are the things that really do call you backwards, to get you up there again, to get you to have another go, because it's a bit like a slot machine, isn't it? You just pull the lever and just hope that the 3 cherries light up. Sometimes it doesn't work, other times it doesn't. But when it does, oh, the sense of enjoyment that you can get from it, how proud you can feel when it all comes together. It's it really is something. I just got to have a look at how many pictures I got left here, because the problem is with these talks is that I get so into them, I can just talk for hours on these sorts of things. I'm just going to show you. I'm going to finish with some reflections. I really want to show you some of these. Have a look at these. This is Blee Tarn on a good year. It's got some of the most fabulous composition potential of all. This is the view that isn't looking towards the Great Langdales. It's looking the other way, but it's got this fabulous set of trees here that you can see, and a mix of pines and larches and all sorts going on there. It's probably like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's a mirror. The thing is, as well, is that you'll often find when you go to these places first thing in the morning, it will just be choppy, and you'll think, great, I'm never going to get the sorts of pictures I'm after. Just hang around. I know it seems like a long time. Explore, do other things, keep coming back, drive around locally and keep coming back to this one potential picture, and you could find that it will all come together. Sometimes I've just rocked up there and I've literally been double taking because it's literally perfect. Other times, and I'll explain to you other images that I've taken, that I just have absolutely no chance of I don't think of ever seeing it still. I've been there so many times and it's never come together. Even when it's not still like this, you can see that it's a combination of just a little bit wind blown. And remember, these are large masses of water, expanses of water, that you'll find that if you just use a slightly longer exposure, I mean, one of your filters, like a 6-stop, for example, can be particularly useful for this sort of specific photography. So, do take your filters with you as well. But the main thing you're after, a simple 50-50 composition, is that's just part of Blee Tarn, and just shows you the sort of potential you can get there. This one, let me just explain to you about this. And this is taken with an M series camera. This is just the little M3 that I've owned for, I can't think how long, 6 years, 7 years. The M6 Mark II that I've been using, what a fantastic camera, even better by a long way. I sort of made the whole thing modular. I've used the lenses from the M3 and I've put them onto the M6, and the M6 is something like 33 plus megapixels, I think. The lenses are very good. They still resolve the camera beautifully. It's no problem with it at all. Angela's written down there the same thing as me. She says she loves her M50. I think that the potential of these cameras, they're really, really something. But, let me just explain to you that I've been to I've been to Buttermere, I think, for 7 years, over those 7 years of going to the Lake District, and every time I arrive there, that you could surf across it. It's so windy, and I see these really sad, unfortunate landscape photographers who base themselves in Buttermere, sort of, I feel, doing the circuit, wandering around, trying to make anything out of it at all. It's so difficult to get it right. It really, really is difficult. And then I've seen other images where, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden, it's like mirror still. It's just, you have to be there. It's as simple as that. It's also in a big valley bowl, so you're not going to get like really intense golden light. What you're going to get is the sun coming over the ridge, and it's that light coming over the ridge that creates this weird sort of set of lighting effect. I'm just driving around in the car, got near to the peninsula sort of bit that's got this little house you can see, which is pretty famous. In fact, David Noten made this very famous many years ago, and it's just a incredible inversion when you see it. It's the striations, the runoff on the sides of the hills, and that reflected, that just creates this weird sort of abstract depth to everything that I did on literally a pocket camera that I rested on a rock. So it just shows you again that you don't need to have masses and masses of equipment in order to be able to capture things that are very evocative. And if I had told you I shot this on, an R5, you would agree that the camera's a wonderful thing, when in fact it was shot with a 7-year-old EOS M3, and that wasn't too long ago, maybe like 2 years ago, I think this was taken, to give you some kind of potential. So, you know, all cameras have the potential these days of taking remarkable photographs. Here's another one from the same shoot. It started to get a little bit windy further down. This is literally just the same position with the camera pointed there 1 minute and pointed there the next. It gives two completely different pictures. Just a piece of advice: get as low as you can. Don't just do it standing up like this, because you'll end up with, there'll be slight parallax problems. Get the camera down as low as you can, because if you can do so, you'll photograph along the water like that, and you'll get yourself a much better picture. It'll also reflect the light better and create a really good result. The lens I used, Angela, was probably the 18 to 55 that I've had with the system for quite some time. I think it's you know, it's a perfectly good enough lens for what it does. The 11 to 22 is a remarkably sharp wide angle. In fact, it's the sharpest of the entire range. And like you said here, you said you think they need better zoom lenses. I would say that I think that they're good enough, but yes, I know what you mean. It's like they could be slightly sharper than they are. And I wish they would produce something that is a sort of like an L series or something on those lines. Particularly great. Again, the same set, now just zoomed in. I've just zoomed in with a 55 to 200 on the same area. But start to think about it. Vista, big vista, large mountain scene, reflection, upside down. Then you start looking at groups of trees, and you go in and in and in with different photographs, taking greater and longer focal lengths, trying to find abstraction in that reflection. And you can see it's not perfect, but it's still got that wonderful inversion that you get from this. Let me just skip a few more. This is one of my favorite all-time autumn pictures. This is Grasmere, the edge of Grasmere. One of the most remarkable color riots of color and tone. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to see this. And this image has just been copy and paste on Pinterest and loads of other places 100,000 times probably since I took it in about 2014. But it just shows you the potential again of what you can get from standing by the roadside at Grasmere. That's all it is. It's standing by the roadside. It's literally nothing else. It's nothing hard to do. And if you get the right conditions and you've got the right situation, you'll be surprised at what you can get from this. Here's another one further down the lake, taken first thing in the morning. Notice there's no good light here. It's just a misty morning. There's nothing else, just mist, and that's it. It's just a grey start to the day, but it can be really good if you've got the right sort of autumn. You've got the right colours, and you can just pick out parts of it with a longer lens. None of it's hard work. It's very easy work, if anything. You just work with a complete 50-50, and all you do is you just create this this abstract effect and just start to look at the elements and the key areas as they go. I've actually had somebody say to me about this picture. This is actually in Country Life. They started like they copied it off a Getty Images collection, because this is a Getty Images held image that I've got, and it's been on the Country Life website quite a lot. And I learned quite a lot about Instagram the other day, because I suddenly started seeing people reposting and reposting this picture everywhere, and I kept getting copy and pasted into all of it. Not that I'm particularly hot on Instagram and things like that, but it gives you some kind of idea that once the machine starts turning, it's quite amazing how people start to reuse pictures everywhere. I had an email from somebody after this was printed in a magazine, in Photo Plus, I think it was, saying that they used to spend their childhood holidays at that particular house. How fantastic. Wanted to know if you could buy a print off me, which I sold them. Amazing. I think that's it. I think that's the end of my talk. Well, pretty much the end of it. So let me just recap one final thing, which I think is really important for you guys. The first thing is, right, okay, you might not be able to get the lakes this year. This is a complicated year, isn't it? It's very, very frustrating that we can't get to places at the moment, and things are are getting more and more complicated, aren't they, with the way things are at the minute, especially after today's announcements. But hopefully, if you haven't got the ability to travel and you haven't got access to be able to move around for the moment, what you can do is make sure that what you'll be able to do is utilize the areas that you've got. And remember that all experimentation, in that sense, all journeys to go and find these things out are never wasted. It's all just solid research that you can use. And this year may not be the year. Next year may be the year when you get an exceptionally good set of conditions or colors. It may be that you find that at certain times you'll suddenly keep an eye on trees. You'll see trees where you live and just think, wow, it has actually been a good autumn here this year. Or now I know what a good autumn looks like. Or now I know what a terrible autumn looks like in that sense. It just depends, I suppose, on what it is that you know, where you live and what equipment you've got and what access you've got. So just remember that is a very, very important aspect of it, is learning your environment and learning to shoot. So remember, color temperature, vitally important. Push your color temperature up. You'll see these wonderful autumn colors come out of greeny yellows, suddenly seem to look a lot browner. But don't try and fool everybody with pushing everything way too warm, because it won't work. You'll notice grass will look yellow, all sorts of things would go wrong. So in other words, just play around with your color temperature slider, the autumn slider, as we could call it now, and move it around into different positions. And what you'll then get is a different response out of everything that you're doing. So I'd just like to mention one last thing, and it's a bit of a plug for me. I just wanted to say to you that I've set up something called a Patreon page, and I'm wanting to teach people not only from the extensive examples that I've given you talking about my work here, but also from the digital processing angle and from many other things as well. And I've set up a what's called a Patreon page, which is essentially, like, I suppose you could call it sort of monetized social media in that sense. But I want to be able to communicate things that I don't feel comfortable with doing so on an unpaid platform. Just giving away everything that I do for free, because in the end, obviously, I do this for a living, and it's very important for me to keep pushing this forward. So I've set up something called a Patreon channel, and if you would be appreciative of going and having a look at least at what I do there, and it starts at just £3 a month for extensive information into my mind, as you could call it, I guess. But what I do is I give a lot more detailed breakdowns of images, and then it moves forward to things like Zoom talks. It will yield video content that I'm producing, and it will also give, even depending on which tier you're interested in, even a one-to-one, a personalized Zoom-orientated one-to-one with me for an hour. But that's my Patreon page that I've just started last month, and already it's starting to pick up a little bit, and I'm going to be advertising it more over the next few coming months. But it's mainly an experimentation, and also because of the fact being that I feel like I really have found the platform, which is probably most important, for which to communicate my teaching. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is open my teaching out, not just to one-to-ones, one-to-one clients, or being on workshops, but give a lot of thinking and communicate a lot of my thinking throughout the platform as well. So if you could have a look at that, I would be most appreciative. Anyway, so there we go. That's all we can say now for the moment, is to thank you very much. Thank you to Cameraworld, and thank you to Canon and Krista, who's been behind the scenes there, probably swatting off scammers or doing something exciting like that. Thank you ever so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. I do hope you've enjoyed this. And no doubt we'll be back again at some point in the future, maybe for a frosty winter talk or something like that, perhaps in the future, where I can talk to you about how to shoot fantastic fantastic winter images or something like that. I'll work on it and see if I can twist a few arms in the background. Thank you once again, everybody. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again soon, I hope.